Eli stared at the screen, his hands stuck in a bowl of bagoom puffs. They were kind of salty for his taste. The Shulvanti just had a high salt tolerance. Screw the blue grail and red grain. He managed a taste for the latter, but Shulvanti drinks tended to be way too sweet. Still, as he got up to root around the kitchen, hoping to find something to wash down the snacks, instead, he'd found the motherlode. Tucked away in the back of the not-quite-mini fridge he hadn't explored, he saw them then, sitting on the back shelf behind a carton of condensed Sneed, whatever that was. His written Vatica was a lot worse, but who cared? There it was. You couldn't miss the white-blue bands and the markings in regular English. He pulled it out slowly, watching the amber liquid roll under the heavy glass. Johnny Walker. Blue label, 2 whole bottles. He licked his lips, looking at them for a moment. One was mostly full, but that meant it was open. There weren't any markings on the bottle. And Warwick lived out at that campus, didn't he? The stash had to be for when he came out here on the weekends or whatever, and the house was theirs until they left, right? Besides, who would miss just a couple of fingers, right? Rolling back to his feet, Eli looked the first bottle over. Sure enough, there were no markings on it. The guy definitely didn't have kids, though Eli sometimes wondered if that was all there was to it back home. Dad didn't ever have the hard stuff. And Warwick? Well, he was out here on Shill. Yeah, he drinks alone, with nobody else, Eli crooned as he walked back to the couch. Damn! He'd never tasted Blue Label before. Well, this was a vacation. Just me and my buddy Walker. Heh. Eli set the bottle down in front of him on the table and looked at it. The announcers were going on about some stuff before the upcoming match, and while he only got about half of what they were guessing, they were talking pretty fast. The tech looked sick. He could drawl over a chance to play some of those games, and he really wanted to see the last match in the stadium. But this was the Blue Label. He checked himself, going back to grab a clean glass. By the time he got back to the couch, the whiskey had settled in the bottle. He bit down on his lower lip happily and uncorked the bottle. Plump! Damn, you even sound good. Just for fun, he corked it and uncorked it again. Time for fun and games soon, so... He picked up the bottle carefully, then gave it a sniff. The hard, peaty smell was there. The aroma was like the red label he got back home, but spicier, and he poured a finger's worth into the glass with real reverence. He made good money, but this was the primo stuff you saw on the top shelf. He'd always thought about treating himself to a bottle, someday. Well, someday was today. The heavy amber whiskey swirled in the glass, and he picked it up, took a sip, and let it run slowly over his tongue. The peat hit him at once, heavy and dark as it rolled over his tongue, followed by a taste of caramel and... It was almost like vanilla ice cream when you got the stuff with the bits in. Eli opened his eyes and looked at the glass in his hand. It was the smoothest drink he'd ever had. Respect, he breathed. Fuck, this was cool. The whole house to himself, and some wild-ass game to watch. Damn it. He needed to do some extra strength groveling, but if this game was that cool, just televised, he had to see it in person. The Shulvanti liked gaming too, after all. In the meantime, phew, maybe alone, but you and me are gonna have a good... The sound of the front door was followed by heavy footsteps, and Eli scrambled, tucking the bottle and his drink out of sight beside the couch. The old folks had stayed over at Mr. Desari's place, but if one of them came around and... Salana trudged around the corner, and Eli heaved a sigh of relief. Oh, thank fuck, it's you. You damn near gave me a heart attack. Eli was about to clutch at his heart for show when he got a better look at her. Salana was a lot of girl. She'd always known how to make him draw, pretty much from the first time he'd laid eyes on her. And even better, she'd done the same right back at him. Maybe the adults complained, and there had been that business before, but as far as he was concerned, the Shulvanti invasion had been like heaven making a home delivery. Shulvanti girls like potato chips. You couldn't have just one, but damn! There was no sense lying about it. Growing up, the queen of his knights had been Salana Dasari. "You look like shit," he said. As open as went, it probably wouldn't score him any points, but she'd ridden his ass pretty hard the last day or three. Besides, it had the virtue of being true. Salana always took care of herself, and now her hair was mussed up. Her shirt was buttoned up wrong, and between the shivering, the goosebumps, and the rock-hard nips, it looked like she'd come back through the chilly night without her coat. Even mussed up, he expected her to lob one back at him, or tell him to get fucked. Or both. Something. Instead, she hung her head and slouched over to fall into the couch before waving her omnipad at him. "Just look at this," she said miserably. Eli shrugged and took the long way back. The living room was the size of a barn, but circling back around the couch let him scoop up his drink before checking out the omnipad. He settled down. Not too close, since she'd been so pissy, but not too far either. It was still Salana. He took a look at the picture on the omnipad and gave a low whistle. "You scored? Dang! Look at you go!" It was only fair. He had pretty much told her she was a dime a dozen here on Shill, though that had just been to get her goat. Salana was still a hot piece, and he'd felt pretty bad about saying it after. He expected her to rub his nose in it. The picture of her was pretty hot, though the idea of another guy... Well, it wasn't like there hadn't been, but there had always been rules. Those were getting thrown out, and here was his proof. He spent a moment feeling that the world had slid out from under him, but instead of gloating, Salana's outrage grabbed his attention as she jabbed at the omnipad. "This was not me! I don't remember any of this!" Eli took another look at the picture. The globes weren't golden, but he knew them by heart. No, that's definitely you. How much did you drink?" "Nothing. I mean, well, maybe. I don't remember it, but I am not drunk." Salana shot him a nasty look that fell on his glass. "How much have you been drinking?" "Just one sip." Eli shrugged. "I've decided I'm cutting back, but this is the good stuff." "Good," she said, snaking the glass from his hand and tossing it back. "You won't need it then." Eli's protest died on his lips. He knew Salana Dasari. He'd seen her highs, her lows, and all the other really good bits. But in all that time, he'd never seen her looking beaten before. Well, shoot. Let me get another glass and tell me what happened. Which he proceeded to do, all without noticing the match had started. The plan had been for her to dispatch Tickanote and Blue Ice away from the station. She had 2 Furious-class battleships, 8 TIE-class destroyers, and the rest of her fleet was made up of Tsunami and Implacable-class heavy and light cruisers. It was a substantial force, and she kept it together and intact during Round 1. Now it sat helpless in Anchorage just off the system's depot. The plan was for Kaslin, Blue Ice, to slip up over the plane of the ecliptic and act as a sensor platform. As soon as they detected the enemy, the sim would drop into real time. From there, her fleet could start to scramble crews back from the depot and begin bringing systems back online, from drives to weapons. Every light minute out gave her team minutes to come to readiness, depending on the speed of the enemy's intercept. "If it were me, I'd come in as fast as possible." Against a fleet at battle stations, anything over 0.2 of light speed was a recipe for disaster, but her fleet was holding station, sitting targets. Given the opportunity to shatter an enemy, then come around to clear up the survivors, was anything below 0.5 unreasonable? As Crash Impact had just reminded everyone in the previous round, the Galaxy Conquest Naval was not a real-time shooter like GC Marine. The speed of light was a factor in communications and targeting, and her Consortium team had used that to throw off the targeting projections of their adversaries and hit back with range. I don't have anything to hit them with until my fleet comes back online. To do that, she needed range. Range meant time. Time meant life. A chance to fight back. Able to pre-deploy only 2 of her ships, everything depended on her plan to position Kaslin in her role as an impromptu sensor platform, while using Tickanote in her battleship to sour their approach. At extreme ranges, Tier 9 ships carried mass flares, little more than decoy engines that could be fired off. They were useless in a firefight, but at range you could create a cloud of force drive signatures. Range was life, and as the clock ticked past, perhaps Tickanote's battleship would have picked up High Lightning's team already. The battleship had vastly better sensors, but instead, she had opted to have Tickanote take position halfway between the star and the depot and go dark. If High Lightning's team came in from around the solar primary, there was a chance the battleship would pose a nasty surprise. At half a light minute out, Kaslin's little destroyer didn't have a fraction of the sensor suite possessed by a Furious, but she couldn't spare the firepower of Tickanote's battleship being outside the ecliptic and effectively out of the fight. Let's see watch the time count off. It hadn't been very long yet. High Lightning's team were in Imperial ships, just like her own. At her best guess, they would come in around 0.4 of light speed. If they came in the long way from the opposite side of the sun, she could have another 12 minutes before the game snapped into real time. If the Lightnings came straight in, using the gas giant as a shield, she might have 4 or 5... Fleetcom, this is Blue Ice. Target acquired. The game snapped into normal time and Letzi hit the alarm. Now, the sim would start scrambling crews, and as they arrived aboard, her ships would begin coming to life. Target acquisition that far out? She knew Kasim was good, but... Letzi's eyes focused on the display. Lost in disbelief for a moment, it didn't register, and she felt herself staring as Kaslin's telemetry data started to refine itself. She had found the enemy fleet all right. Bearing down on her from the other side of the Super Jovian, and closing at 0.6 of light speed, was a Typhoon-class aerospace domination craft. At Tier 9, those ships were the big stick of the Imperial Navy. A fleet breaker. The plan had been to face a flotilla coming in around 0.4 of light speed, with whatever ships she was able to muster. The plan had failed. And why the professional marine teams spend their off days doing synchronized swimming? Emick, the Yahtzee woman, said. Swimming wasn't a thing Yahtzee did well, and she leaned forward, showing off her rapt fascination. Just look at their skills once they're out on the field. That's right. Corray, the Shuvanti announcer, nodded sagely. At this point the game is on, and there's no way Obsidian Syndrome and her fleet are going to hold off that Typhoon. Holding the depot is part of High Lightning's victory conditions, so one way or another, we're in for a fight between... Cassell, the night crew, broke in. But since we've got time, let's have a word for our sponsors and the exciting new Dominatrix 20 Games Lab by Vite. Corray pursed her lips in frustration, though she didn't actually scowl. Still. So, is it true that all D19s in the Consortium self-destructed in just another credit grab? Well, sure. The new self-termination mode ensures players have to upgrade. Cassell looked back at Corray like there was something unpleasant stuck to her shoe. Who wants to play on an old D19 anyway? We're talking a D20 here, with the jaw-dropping new hyperreal graphics, pushing realism to its very limits by rendering over 270,000 shades of black. Just look at this screenshot. Not even a night crew can tell the difference. The D19s came out last year. Corée crossed her arms. Last year. Isn't it great? Unlike the D19, which patches updates every 3 days, the D20 GameSlab patches every hour. Why worry? At the current pace of development, the D26 will take over as your goddess. Heathen Consortium bitch! This is a Frovey! Oh, lick me, you slack-titted! How? You hit me in the face! I'll do you for... We now return you to the match currently in progress. Eli swirled around his glass of blue. Salana didn't do a finger of booze, more like 2 or so at a go, tossing it back. She wasn't a heavy drinker at all, but when she got in the mood, she could toss it back as hard as any guy he knew. It was only being polite to keep pace. She was in a mood now. A bad one, and blaming everything under the sun on that girl Melondi. Well, that wouldn't fly. Partly because if he was going to make it out to see the finals of the game tomorrow, he needed to be on everybody's good side. Melondi kept coming down with family commitments to everything, so if he was going to snag a seat from anyone, making nice was kinda a must. And it probably meant an apology for the other night. A good one. Okay, given how it had all gone down like a turd in a punch bowl, a really good one. Mind you, the other reason it wouldn't fly was... well, Salana was wrong. Yeah, he got the whole thing about her making something of herself, but doing it by tricking Vadim was all kinds of wrong. Not that he knew the guy well. Alright, and maybe he was a little jealous, but Salana was alright. Granted, part of that was that she'd been his teenage dream come true, but he knew her. Salana wasn't just a piece of ass. She was his piece of ass. Eli tried to hide the look on his face. It was hard enough processing whatever happened to Salana that afternoon, without trying to figure out anything else. Somehow, some way, Salana had gotten laid, and she wasn't happy about it. Eli went with what he knew. Alright, so let me sum this up. You weren't drinking, but you don't remember getting laid, and then suddenly you got chased out of the room by some duchess, and somehow you got a pic on your Omnipad you can't remember taking? It sounded like a pretty lame excuse to him, but he'd come up with a few of his own over the years. Of course, there was the other thing, and Eli thought about it as Salana shrugged and tossed back another 2 fingers of Johnny. Dad had always gone on about the problems of drinking too much, how he'd raised a lot more hell than he wanted to remember, and nearly missed out on a lot of important things in life. Okay, the farm was nothing special as far as Eli was concerned. It was a farm, the same as it had always been. But Dad was firm about how he nearly missed out on being with Mum, which would have meant no family. And no him. Eli wasn't big on facing up to an existential crisis, but he was big on self-preservation. Dad's drinking had nearly cost him everything. Eli had paid attention, and while he had too much now and then, as a rule, he steered clear. Booze was fun, but it was nowhere near as good as women. And women? Well, he'd been doing some thinking about that, too. Salana was still wrong about going after Vadim, but mostly, it felt like she was being wrong about herself. Salana, I know I've been kind of a jerk the last few days. Salana gave him a bleary look, but he stuck with it. It felt like he was on a roll. More than usual. It's just I get what you were saying about making something of yourself. That's why I'm cutting back on this. Eli stared at his empty glass, but didn't go for another refill. Salana. He'd been talking about Salana. You don't need a guy to make your life special. You're special to me just as you are. Don't you know that? Salana shook her head, and he couldn't tell if it was in denial or clearing her thoughts.
Shame or shit. Do you remember that sex we were planning to have never again?
She said harshly, but her lip quivered as she looked at him.
You're just saying that. Just Eli Munschlangdong. Talking bullshit.
I am not! Eli reared back in denial. Okay, you don't care about the rules anymore, but you know one thing, Shoal. You know one thing? One thing.
What? What do I know?
You know, I have never, not once, ever lied to you. Eli felt like he was riding high on the buzz. Damn, but that blue label was smooth, but he knew what he had to say. He leaned toward her, checking himself before slipping over.
You know that. I've never lied to you in all my life, and you're important. You're important to me, just the way you are.
Of course, he didn't bargain on Salana throwing her head down on his lap, clutching desperately to his leg. He tugged her hair back as her lip quivered, and hot tears started rolling down her cheeks.
Eli, what am I gonna do?
She wailed, before gulping and rubbing at the tears with one hand. She was still a Shivanti, and big girls didn't cry. Look, I've been trying to figure that out a little better myself, last day or two. Eli stroked her hair. He didn't have much experience with crying girls, but it seemed like the right thing to do. It was Salana, and he shook his head. You and I, we both want more. Took me a long time to figure that out. That was true. Memories of Chloe came flooding back, and that had been her fault. He thought so, at least. People move at their own speed. Maybe you and me are just late bloomers. Salana, Shill isn't your home, so whatever you want to do, how about we figure that out together? She sniffled again.
You really believe that?
I kinda do. Look, maybe we can't be whatever we want, you know? I mean, like maybe we can't be anything. That's a little, optimistic. But you and me, we can be so many things, you know? Nobody expected me to be anything but a farm boy, and now I'm a salesman, but I'm a good salesman. I like what I do too, and I help folks, and I like that too.
So, you think I should sell stuff?
She said with a sniff, still clinging to his leg. I think, what I mean is, I went past what folks expected from me, and now I want to go a little farther too, he said, meeting her eye as she looked up at him. And so can you.
You really think so, Eli?
She said, looking up at him hopefully. I really do. He nodded firmly. Maybe we have a little baggage to carry, but we could carry it together.
Fleetcom, this is Obsidian Syndrome, actual.
Letsy spoke up, her flotilla all within range for real-time comms. Their pods were only feet away, scattered around the hall, but the game would time delay her announcement to Tickanote and Blue Ice.
We have inbound contact. Stand by for orders.
There you go, Admiral Obvious. Her whole fleet was getting telemetry from Kasdan's destroyer, but that was damp comfort. Instead of coming in at a velocity that would let her fleet strafe hers, High Lightning had come in fast and hard. Her ships were already braking, but they had closed the range far too soon, depriving her of the one thing she needed. There would be no time to activate her ships. None at all. And what a fleet! It wasn't a fleet at all, but it didn't have to be. Created over a century ago, the Typhoon class was a fleet in itself, and they'd been the terror of the galaxy. The first 4 ships of the class, Typhoon, courage, duty, and honor has stunned the Consortium and sent the Alliance running. Even by today's standards, they were impressive, though weapons technology had rendered them obsolete. In their prime, they were staggering shows of power. At Tier 9, the one on her scope was the enemy fleet, along with a scattering of lightly armed corvettes that were little better than couriers. Whoever had allocated the points for High Lightning's team, they'd given themselves a hammer, and she was the anvil. She had no fleet, just sitting targets, Kazlin's distant destroyer, and Tikhonot's battleship. Lying dark, on the far side of the intercept against a typhoon, and yes, it was capable of decimating her fleet alone, but the typhoon has something else to go with all that armor and firepower. Mass. A vast amount of mass, and all of it was decelerating in an arc that would be very, very predictable. "Tikhonot, this is Obsidian Syndrome. Drop down to Channel 2, she said sharply. A moment later, Tikhonot's voice came over the line. "If you want to tell me we're fucked, I already know," she said gruffly. "Maybe," she said. "But I think they're about to have a terminal health issue." Tikhonot dropped into the flow. What the deeps else was there to do? There were times when the game just moved the way it should. Times when you felt like you couldn't miss. Okay, this wasn't one of those times, but what could you do? They were fucked, and Obsidian Syndrome's plan was their only way out. A 0-0 intercept. The term was used when you had carriers in the game, and girls playing whole flights of interceptors would deploy or move to rendezvous with their targets. This wasn't a fighter, it was a battleship. It had defenses to last just long enough, and as the typhoon came sailing out from behind the cusp of the gas giant, time was not on its side. Tikhonot didn't have time for adjustments, but there wasn't a need for them anyway. The telemetry coming from blue ice was solid, and when all was done, it was mostly the math. Piloting was mostly math, and the typhoon was on a set vector and had been decelerating on a steady curve. The Furious-class battleship also had a steady acceleration curve, and Tikhonot pushed it to the limit. Math worked, and the 2 points intersected there. But piloting was also a labour of love, not just math. The math could tell you how to fly, but it could also tell you how to crash, and as the Furious accelerated past point 1C, Tikhonot knew it would also tell you how to miss. As big as a typhoon was up close, over planetary distances it wasn't even a speck of sand, and Tikhonot checked the gravity wells of every body orbiting the supergiant. Some of the moons were the size of planets, and to miss by even a meter would be like missing by a light year. Every moon had its own gravity well, and the curves and rhythms of how they rippled flow across the plotter like water. In the end, it was only a matter of seconds. Tikhonot didn't dare open fire. The typhoon was decelerating, and the risk of hitting an engine and altering the ship's trajectory by even a fraction was too much. It all came down to... There wasn't even time to see the massive dreadnought on screen before it went black, and the game pod went dark. The ship was dead. Out of the match. Deeps. I wanted to go all the way. Tikhonot sighed, drinking in the dim light of the game pod. When you died, the pods definitely let you know it. Opening the pod, cheers echoed around the hall. Tikhonot! 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 Hey, excuse me. Do you know where Tikhonot is? A girl was standing near one of the pods. She had long black hair down to her shoulders, and a long blue ribbon wound into a braid. I know it's not proper etiquette, but I kind of want to find her. He looked up at the girl. At 6'5", she still towered over him, but no more than most of the girls at his flight school. Offering his fist, he pushed aside his irritation.
I'm her. Pleased to meet you.
Back in the day, astronomy had been Tom's thing even more than now. A lot more than now, considering the Imperium had a healthy chunk of the galaxy mapped. But back in his youth, Tom had stood up and given a class in high school, and naturally, he discussed astronomy. It was ironic that he'd mentioned planetary impacts. Back then, it was theory. Then, in 1994, a comet named Shoemaker-Levy punched planet-sized holes in Jupiter's atmosphere, traveling a mere 134,000 miles per hour. When Tikhonot's battleship slammed into Team Lightning's Typhoon at an appreciable fraction of the speed of light, the blast wave of ionized plasma had done the rest. Salana was in a funk over not seeing a marine battle, again, but there was still a third match, and he had dinner to make. Tom Warwick knew a few things about onions. In the years since the invasion, one of the things he learned to do with his copious spare time was learn how to cook. Being of a philosophical turn of mind, and certainly educated as one, Tom considered the two useful analogies he knew about onions as he fixed onion soup. It was a cold day. Miv and Leia would be home, and he scored some good crusty bread from the restaurant that needed eating. That, and some onions. Shrek had certainly made one useful analogy about onions. The one that everyone heard at one time or another. That people had layers. That was true, as far as it went. But that was also only useful, as far as it went. People didn't have layers. Individuals had layers. People in the plural did not. That was where the other useful analogy came in, because you didn't peel an onion when you cooked it. You chopped them. The thing about onions was that, while they could rot just like any other vegetable, sometimes they got bad spots. If you got a bad spot on the outside, you cut it out. The rest would taste fine. Sharp, but onions were there to taste sharp, so that was no problem. But if you got a bad spot on the inside, then it wouldn't show. You could chop it up and, well, Shilvanti would notice a bad spot by hunting it down and trying it for treason, even if it damaged the rest of the onion. Rakiri would sniff out the bad spot, nod sagaciously, then blow up the onion. They liked their meat with a minimum of veg, so who needed onions anyway? Helcom would notice the bad spot, watch you cook it, eat it, and spit it out. When you ask them why they hadn't said something, they look embarrassed and say, "You didn't ask." By all accounts, Nightcrew didn't care if there were bad spots. They just wanted to sell you onions in bulk with an indentured servitude if you didn't meet the payments. Those, Tom had decided, were much more useful analogies, and he spent years refining them. Pezrin would take time, but he was getting there. It probably involved ritual sacrifice and blood for the onion god, but they'd do it devoutly if they could feast on the onion later. He had a working sample of one Pezrin, so he could workshop it. Tom set aside the cheese. He could make French onion soup for himself. Shilvanti could get lactose intolerant once they hit puberty, and that wasn't an experience he wanted for Salana's first home-cooked meal. Even if it was in the hotel, it still counted. Miv and Leia would be home soon, and he'd have something hot for all of them to share, instead of eating out again. A family meal, even if Desi, Zinshiki, and the other girls were out. A family meal for the adults before watching the speech. That was important. This was Kalira's moment to shine. Kalira Tasu, known to him as Belondi Sandoka, was trained in elocution. You couldn't miss that. While her thoughts were sometimes unformed on a given subject, when she stood up in class, her training took over. She said what she had to say, and however developed her ideas were or weren't, she was articulate. What she had to say during the address of the Dayak would be, without question, delivered with the presentation worthy of a princess. is she'd felt the need for a primer. To be fair, she'd had her role in tonight's address dropped on her from out of the blue. The truth was that she probably could wing it, but that wasn't what tonight was for, and Shovanti didn't tend to wing it very well. It was the rote learning they preferred. They could recite a weapons manual in detail and call up passages by memory, but ask them something extemporaneous? Throw them a curveball, and they choked. Oh, and humans? After all was said and done, humans have been the easiest. Despite the tears, when humans weren't chopping the living hell out of onions, they threw curveballs with them, bad spots and all. He had no doubt that Clara would have gotten there. He was proud that his adopted daughter was there to help her out. The girls really were inseparable. But mostly, he wondered what he had wrought. Charlie Chaplin's speech in The Great Dictator was, to his mind, the best words ever spoken. It wasn't about a singular virtue or aspiration. It acknowledged how change could either live up to its promise or spell disaster. That people could rise up to cultivate the better angels of their nature, or fall down to feed their inner demons. It was Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, with technology thrown in, something the Imperium could understand, and like Lincoln's words, it was delivered from start to finish in a handful of minutes, rather than hours. There was no picture of Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address. The cameraman believed he had plenty of time. There was only a photo of him returning to his seat. Tom had always been inspired by Chaplin's words. Along with what Tom Steinberg might bring to the table, they were exactly the thing for after the section on World War II. Now, he wondered just what one Kalira Tazu and one Deshin Pelavon Warwick might have done with them. However much or little that was, he had the feeling they would have an impact. He'd done his best to cultivate some shape to the outcome, but it was wrong to pour young minds into a mould. Young people were made for the future, made to fit a different time than yours. The future belonged to Kalira, to the Desses and Jacksmiths, the Levis and Melodies and Rialas, and, unfortunately, even the Elis. It wasn't their time yet, but that day was coming. Somehow they would all find their own normal and... You haven't said much. Salana cantered ahead ever so slightly. That smells good too. What is it? Ah, it's onion soup, and I was just gathering my thoughts. Sorry. Tom took the onions off the heat. They were nicely caramelized, and he hadn't seen any bad spots. Can I ask you a question? She started again. Lani was a big woman, but very much all woman. Miv was tall, fit, and toned. Leia was petite, if only for a Shovanti. Slim, but with all the right curves. Lani? If you took Bridget Nielsen in her Red Sonja days and turned the dial up to 11, you got something like Salani. Okay, 11 edging towards 12. The notion of their honeymoon was daunting, but he wasn't marrying her for her physique. Not that it hurt. Tom knew himself. The honeymoon might kill him, but he'd go with a smile. And yes, I know that makes two, she added, noting his bemused smile and misreading his own. I'd be disappointed if you didn't. Tom checked the meal and knew he had time, as long as he didn't let anything burn. Leaving aside that you know me better than I know you, what with a bunker and all, communication is very important to me. I don't want there to be mysteries between us. There are still some things about man that woman wasn't meant to know, Lani said, her voice turning mischievous. The whole thing with bathrooms? Is that a human thing, or... I will swear to the Empress that I have no basis for comparison. I've never seen Bodin's bathroom, and I'm pretty sure he'd scream and faint if he saw mine. So, what did you want to ask? Everything, she said with a cheeky smile. I always hoped I'd get married, but, well, my work doesn't put me in the way of many men, and after a certain age, the bar scene starts to feel a little desperate. Besides, no one wants an officer hanging out trying to hit on the guys. It's not good for morale or your reputation. Yeah, I get that. Everything, though? Going to have to start a little smaller than that. I'm one of those folks who works better with being asked. I was probably my own company for too long, so just offering stuff up out of the blue isn't my thing. Just ask.
I want to make you happy. You always seem happy with Mever and Shalea, and I want to do that for you too, Salani said. You haven't always been that way. Happy, I mean.
Tom wiped his hand off on a towel and considered his fiancée. That took some getting used to, but then everything had. After a certain point, you just went along for the ride. You didn't meet me on my best day.
I know. I think I'm asking this badly, she said, grimacing slightly. Right then. Are you? Happy, I mean.
A straight answer would have been easy, but Salani had spent a good portion of her day watching him, every day, every shift, for months. When you thought about it, it was daunting. Not only had she watched, she'd paid attention. Doubtless as part of her job, she studied every nuance, and now she was asking a question that had no ready answer. A simple yes would not suffice, and after preaching the virtues of open communication, it would have been a lie. Stop me if you don't understand something I say. Tom saw her expression. Miv would have looked at him patiently, while Shalea would have been amused. Salani nodded once and settled into the couch like it was story time. I grew up never feeling like I was in the right time or right place. I think it was watching Star Trek as a child. That was, well, a fictional entertainment about...
You've mentioned it. Maybe you could show me sometime, she said with a smile. But you said once that it was sort of a first presentation about coming together as one species.
That's right. Humans of all kinds on a ship, and one alien. But the idea was that humanity could come together as a species and play well with others too. That was something new, saying we didn't have to be lots of little tribes, and it made an impression. Tom sighed then. I guess the part that made me sad was that in my day, we had no more hidden valleys to discover. Every inch of the planet had been mapped and charted. As much as some folks refused to accept we were all one world, there was nowhere left to explore. Your people always settled along some beach, but humanity's always wandered. We were hunters and gatherers, always looking over the next hill, and by the time I grew up, there were no hills to climb. The biggest adventure in my lifetime was going to our moon, and then we just stopped. Salani didn't say a word, though he saw her lip quirk once. Shorvanti might not have the instinctive gene for exploration, but they settled with a vengeance. It was a better blueprint for an empire than most, and what he'd grown up feeling was loss. Shorvanti weren't explorers, but they were expanders. To go somewhere, then stop, was genuinely inconceivable to them. Humanities did, I came, I saw, I conquered. Shorvanti were more, I came, I saw, I set up house. Same effect, different perspective. The point is, I grew up feeling like I was born too early or too late. Restless, always asking myself who I was and what I was doing. I felt like my soul was from somewhere else and I had no way to get there. So I knew the problem, if not the answer.
When you met your first wife? Salani asked quietly. That's when you were happy?
Yes, I was, but no, that's not what it was about. Unlike humans, other species seem to have the idea that relationships made you complete. If the odds meant you were on your own, it made sense to complete yourself. Oh, Shorvanti wanted to be in relationships, but it was nothing they counted on. Two separate issues. I was very happy with my family, but one day, and this would take too much to explain, I saw something that made it all snap into focus with this awful clarity. I saw it, and by it, I mean all of it. Like I stepped outside my life and looked at everything.
And everything?
I had a good life, and I was happy. I wouldn't claim an epiphany of life's answers, but maybe one of perspective. Tom shrugged once. And what can you do with that? I filed it away. Nothing left, nothing right, and nothing wrong. But there was. From Salana's expression, he might have just grown a second head. It was a difficult trip to get here, and it had a world of pain and loss, but I promise you I'm where I need to be now, and... Bugger! That's it! Please tell me this isn't another epiphany, Lani said warily. No, I just remembered to call Lark. Tom shoved the bread in the oven to let it brown. Rolling with the absurd meant that the wedding would be what it was. It was a Shivanti wedding this time, and come what may, he was absolved, but Miv had still asked him to call about the wedding video. With luck, he could make the call before Miv and Leia got home. Of course we're ready, Lark said confidently. I checked everything yesterday, and it's all set. Bree and I will be there and ready to record. I appreciate this more than I can say. Of course, sir, and... Oh, we'll be over to the campus tomorrow. See you soon. That was true enough. Despite her work being under threat of imperial censorship because of Kalira, she still had a documentary to put together on Thomas Warwick. The one had constrained the other, but not stopped it. Oh, this would push back publication years, but it was like being handed 2 platinum mines, even if all legal penalties applied. And the wedding? This wasn't just a documentary. She had an exclusive. She could barely breathe the words. It's an exclusive. I've never had an exclusive before. I heard, so just breathe, Gumbri said, standing in the kitchen with her. I've got the cameras all set. We've scooped out the cathedral and checked the light levels. Twice. It's going to be perfect. What else is there to do? Else? Oh, Deeps! I have to tell Nesta. She'll know how to handle this. Thank the goddess word hasn't gotten out, but her mother may want a piece of this, and it's only fair. I suppose. That's very thoughtful, Bree nodded before cocking her head. So, off to see her at this secret get-together, then? Should I be jealous? Bree, I've told you I can't talk about this. Yeah, I'm just yanking your chain. Reporters have confidential sources. Say hello to her for me. Thanks, that means a lot. I will. Bree? Yes? You know you can take your hand off my ass now. Just 2 more minutes.